Okay, let's set the scene. It's Saturday, October 7th, 2023, around 6:30 in the morning, Israel summertime.
Right. And that's the moment Hamas launches Operation Al-Aqsa Flood.
Yeah, and it starts big. We're talking at least 4,300 rockets heading into Israel, hitting lots of places.
And not just rockets. At the same time, you have militants crossing the border on the ground. It was, well, massive, coordinated.
Exactly. And that's what we're really digging into today in this deep dive.
We want to try and understand, the core parts of what happened that day. We've looked at quite a few sources. The big Wikipedia page has a lot, for instance.
And crucially, the material you sent us. We're trying to pull out the most important bits for you.
Our mission here, really, is to give you a clear picture, cut through all the noise.
Yeah, there's just so much information. We want to offer a sharp overview, key events, the motivations behind them, the immediate fallout. It's incredibly complex.
It really is.
So let's jump right in. That initial assault.
Okay, so it wasn't just one thing. It was multi-pronged, as they say. You had the intense rocket fire, obviously.
Right.
But then also militants coming in vehicles and maybe more surprisingly using powered paragliders.
Paragliders, yeah. That caught a lot of attention. And the number of people involved. That was huge too, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The estimates suggest around 6,000 Gazans actually breached the border fence.
6,000. Wow.
Yeah, it's something like 119 different locations. And within that group, you've got about 3,800 from Hamas's Nukba forces, sort of their elite commando units.
Okay.
Plus another 2,200 militants and even some civilians mixed in.
And that's just the ground forces.
Right. You also have to figure maybe another 1,000 people involved just in firing all those rockets.
So a very significant operation in terms of manpower.
Right.
And their targets.
They seem to hit military bases, yes, but also 21 specific civilian communities, places that became tragically well known. Be'eri, Kfar Az.
Miras, Netiv Asara, Alumim.
Exactly. Those were hit very hard in the initial waves. Looking at it, you can see this was planned. Highly coordinated, ambitious.
And the cost. The human cost was just devastatingly high. The final toll reached 1,195 people killed.
That's such a staggering number. And breaking it down, it includes 736 Israeli civilians and 36 children among them.
Just awful.
Plus 79 foreign nationals who were killed and 379 members of the Israeli security forces.
The number of civilian deaths is hard to comprehend.
Okay.
And the Nova Music Festival near Reem, that stands out with such horrific numbers.
It does. 364 civilians killed just at that one location.
That's more than a quarter of the total deaths right there. What does that tell us? Was it deliberate targeting of civilians or just the sheer chaos?
Well, it's a really tough question. The scale of death there certainly points towards either deliberate targeting or, at the very least, a complete disregard for civilian lives during the attack. It really highlights the brutality. And then you have the added complexity of things like the Hannibal Directive, this controversial Israeli military procedure.
Right, designed to prevent soldiers being captured.
Exactly. But reports suggest its application that day might have led to friendly fire deaths, including civilians. Some reports mention at least 14 Israeli civilians potentially killed as a result of efforts to stop attackers returning to Gaza with hostages.
Which brings us to the hostages.
Yeah.
That became a huge part of this immediately.
Absolutely. Around 250 Israelis, civilians and soldiers taken captive, including 30 children.
30 children.
Yeah. And Hamas was very clear about their goal: exchange them for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons.
So it instantly became not just a military situation, but this incredibly complex hostage crisis.
And that leads us into the planning behind it all. How did this happen?
Yeah.
And the apparent intelligence failure.
Right. This seems to be a major part of the story, the planning phase. Hamas apparently used old school methods.
That's what the reports indicate. For 2 years, they were supposedly using hardwired phone lines inside their tunnel network, the Gaza Metro, as it's sometimes called.
Hardwired phones. Wow.
Yeah, basically bypassing modern electronic surveillance. Physical infrastructure for covert communication. It shows the limits of relying just on signals intelligence.
That's fascinating. And yet they weren't entirely secretive, were they? There were videos.
Well, that's the almost unbelievable part. In the months leading up to it, Hamas actually released videos showing their fighters training.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of that. Hostage-taking drills, paragliding practice, even simulating breaching the border fence.
Exactly. Which makes you ask, why wasn't this taken more seriously? How are these signals missed or misinterpreted?
Did the IDF acknowledge this later?
Well, the IDF's own post-attack assessment reportedly concluded that Hamas had done extensive reconnaissance. They'd studied the military bases, the settlements near the border, meticulously.
So it points to a definite intelligence gap.
A significant one. A Haaretz investigation dug into this, suggesting possible incompetence in the higher ranks, maybe a refusal to believe Hamas was capable of or intending something on this scale. They also mentioned reduced funding for Hamas observation units and even a toxic atmosphere where maybe dissenting voices, analysts warning about this, weren't heard.
So it wasn't just missing signals, but maybe a systemic issue. Overconfidence, perhaps?
Possibly. An over-reliance on assumptions about Hamas's capabilities and intentions. It's a stark lesson, really, for intelligence agencies everywhere.
So with all this planning, this training, we get to that Saturday morning, 6:30 a.m., Hamas officially announces Operation Al-Aqsa fled.
And very soon after, Mohammed Def, the commander of their military wing, gives a speech. He lays out Hamas's reasons.
What were the main points he raised?
He listed a whole range of grievances: the 16-year blockade of Gaza, obviously, Israeli military actions in the West Bank,
Right.
violence around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, settler violence, demolition of Palestinian homes, the issue of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel for long periods.
A long list.
Yeah, and he also mentioned what Hamas sees as Israel ignoring international law and the international community being silent or ineffective.
And he stated the aim of the operation.
He framed it as aiming to end the last occupation on Earth. It's important, to understand how they presented their motivations, regardless of how one views the situation.
Absolutely. And then immediately, the rockets.
That massive barrage we mentioned, over 4,300 projectiles, according to Israeli sources, in just the first 20 minutes or so, just an overwhelming volume.
What was the immediate impact of that initial rocket fire?
It killed 12 people almost right away, injured dozens more. A lot of those initial casualties were reportedly from the Bedouin communities near Gaza.
And the explosions were widespread.
Yes, not just near Gaza. Reports came in from the Sharon Plain places like Judea, Herzliya, also Beersheba, Tel Aviv, Ashkelon. It showed a reach that maybe surprised some people.
And while this is happening in the air, the ground assault begins. We mentioned the numbers around 6,000 people breaching the border.
In 119 places, using all sorts of methods. Trucks, motorcycles, bulldozers smashing through the barriers, even speedboats on the coast, and those paragliders. Tactical variety.
Let's talk about some specific locations. Squidero was one of the first hit, right?
Yes, the Swiderot police station was reportedly overrun quite early. Very tragically, 30 Israelis were killed in Swiderot police and civilians.
And there were reports about them destroying equipment.
Deliberately, it seems, targeting computer systems at the police station, apparently to knock out communications and delay the Israeli response right at the start.
Crippling communications.
Okay.
Then, the Nova Music Festival near Rome. We mentioned the awful death toll 364. The context there is just chilling. A party.
Yeah, a large outdoor music festival. Eyewitnesses described militants arriving on motorcycles, opening fire on people who were already trying to run because of the initial rocket sirens.
So they were already scattering.
Yes. And on top of the hundreds killed there, at least 40 people were taken hostage from the festival site itself. It became the single deadliest location of the entire attack.
Just horrific. And other communities. Kfar Aza.
Also described as a massacre. Reports indicate around 50 civilians killed there.
And Bereri. That was another kibbutz hit very hard.
Extremely hard. Around 70 Hamas militants attacked Beeri. At least 130 residents were killed. That's about 10% of the kibbutz population.
10%.
Yeah. Homes were burned down. Many people were taken hostage, leading to these long, tense standoffs when Israeli forces finally arrived.
And there were reports of friendly fire there, too.
Tragically, yes, including one widely reported incident where an Israeli tank fired on a house where hostages were being held with Hamas fighters. Almost all the hostages inside were reportedly killed in that incident. It highlights the chaos and the terrible dilemmas faced in the fighting.
There was another smaller festival, too, wasn't there?
Yes, the Sayduk Music Festival. A smaller trance party near Oz, maybe 100 people there. 17 Israelis were killed at that location.
The sheer number of places hit simultaneously. It must have been overwhelming for the initial responders.
Absolutely. If you look at the list of affected locations, it's extensive. Military bases like Reem and Nahalaz, lookout posts, training bases like Zikim.
And so many kibbutzim and moshavim, Nir Oz, Nirim, Netiv Hasara, Alumim, Kisufim, Holit, Ain Hashlosha, Nir Yitzhak, Nir Am, Ofakim, Sufa.
All attacked, all suffering casualties, hostage-taking. It wasn't just one or two border points. It was a widespread offensive across southern Israel.
And then come the reports of atrocities, which are incredibly disturbing and need careful handling.
Extremely disturbing. There were numerous reports about sexual violence, rape, assault, mutilation of Israeli women and girls.
Hamas denied their fighters were involved in that, right?
Hamas officially denied it, yes. However, a UN Commission of Inquiry report from June 2024 stated it found incidents indicative of sexual violence by Palestinian forces.
Where specifically?
At the Nova Festival site, the Nahal Oz military base, and in several kibbutzim. The commission concluded there was a pattern indicative of sexual violence and held Hamas responsible for gender-based violence through killings, abductions, and other abuse.
But they couldn't verify everything.
They noted they couldn't independently verify all the testimonies, partly due to lack of access. It's a very difficult and sensitive area.
And beyond sexual violence, there were reports of torture, mutilation.
Yes. The Haaretz investigation we mentioned earlier reported findings that members of Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other Gazans committed war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Like what?
Desecration of corpses, beheadings, dismemberment, especially targeting soldiers.
It's crucial to be accurate here, though. There was some misinformation early on.
There was. Some initial, highly graphic reports from Israeli sources, particularly about atrocities against children, were later found to be inaccurate or couldn't be verified. That said, forensic analysis presented later did suggest some victims were burned alive with their hands bound.
Okay.
And it did confirm 2 or 3 cases of decapitation involving adults or military-aged individuals. So extreme violence clearly occurred, but separating verified facts from initial, sometimes exaggerated reports is really important.
Now, the Israeli response, you mentioned it was delayed initially.
Yes, reports widely indicate it took several hours for the IDF, the Israeli military, to really mobilize and deploy forces in sufficient numbers to counter the attacks effectively. That delay is a big part of the post-event analysis.
And the issue of friendly fire during that response.
It seems to have been significant. A Ynet report later called it an immense and complex quantity of friendly fire incidents.
And this connects back to the Hannibal Directive you mentioned.
Potentially, yes. An investigation by another Israeli newspaper, Yedioth Ahronoth, reportedly found that the IDF had effectively implemented the Hannibal Directive.
Remind us the order to stop captured soldiers returning to Gaza at any cost.
At all costs, yes, even if it meant harming the hostages. Orders along these lines were apparently issued quite early on October 7th, around 7:15 a.m.
Wow, that early.
And there are accounts of Israeli helicopters, maybe tanks too, firing on vehicles heading back towards Gaza. About 70 vehicles were later found burnt out on those roads. How many hostages might have been killed by friendly fire in that context? It's still a very painful and debated question in Israel.
Okay, let's shift to the reactions. How did Palestinians react initially?
Well, polling data from November 2023, so about a month after, showed a pretty significant jump in Hamas's popularity, both in Gaza and the West Bank.
Really? Even in Gaza?
Yes, at that specific time. Overwhelming support for the attack was reported in the West Bank, and a majority supported it in Gaza back then.
But that changed.
It did. By 2024, further polling showed support for the October 7th attack had dropped significantly within Gaza itself, likely due to the immense devastation caused by Israel's military response and the humanitarian crisis.
And within Israel.
An immediate declaration of a state of readiness for war, total shock and mobilization, and significantly, Arab-Israeli political leaders like Mansour Abbas publicly condemned the attacks, showing a degree of unity in grief and condemnation across Israeli society.
What about the rest of the world?
The international reaction was varied. Many countries strongly condemned Hamas, often calling it terrorism.
But not all.
Some Arab and Muslim nations pointed fingers back at Israeli policies as the root cause. Interestingly, initial statements from countries like the UAE and Bahrain, which have normalization deals with Israel, were somewhat cautious before later becoming more explicit in condemning the killing of civilians.
What about China?
China also adjusted its stance slightly to condemn harm to civilians more directly. Public opinion in parts of the Arab world was different, though. Polls, for instance, showed a majority of Saudis didn't actually believe Hamas had killed civilians.
That's quite a disconnect.
It is, and the UN faced criticism too, particularly regarding its initial response time to the reports of sexual violence. Many felt it was too slow or inadequate.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly summarize the key takeaways.
Well, first, the sheer scale and the multi-pronged nature of the attack were really unprecedented. The volume of rockets, the widespread ground incursions, It marked a major shift.
And the human cost was just immense. The loss of life, especially civilian life, and the large number of hostages taken created an immediate crisis. The Nova Festival tragedy really underscores that.
Absolutely. Then there are the apparent significant intelligence failures on the Israeli side. That's raised huge questions about readiness, threat assessment, and maybe even internal communication within the security establishment.
And the immediate consequences, Israel's massive military response, the complex reactions locally and globally. It's clear this one day has had profound ongoing repercussions.
Definitely.
We hope this deep dive has helped you, the listener, get a more structured, detailed grasp of what happened on that pivotal day. It's complex, but hopefully this makes it a bit clearer.
Yeah, the level of Hamas planning, the way they breached those defenses, it does reveal some surprising aspects of modern conflict, doesn't it?
It really does.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider. Given everything we've discussed, the detailed planning, the scale of the breach, the intelligence aspects, what does this event really tell us about how conflict is changing? The strategies non-state groups might use now, and the challenges even very advanced nations face in anticipating these kinds of large-scale, coordinated attacks.
That's a heavy question, but a really important one to think about long after we finish talking.